Today, as is tradition, we'll be looking at what I like to think adds to the Cthulhu mythos rather than a film based on any established story. However, despite this film being free from the constraints of adapting an actual story, it still needs key Lovecraftian elements to make it feel like it's part of the Cthulhu mythos. So, I guess we shall see. Welcome back to HP Lovecraft Month. The Void is different to the last film I featured in the previous series because Oculus was based on my interpretation of what makes a Lovecraftian horror film. But The Void is much closer to In the Mouth of Madness, as it's designed to be a Lovecraft-style film, and it directly references the Cthulhu mythos. It's also billed as a real love letter to classic 80s horror films. However, you'll probably see, like me, that it's addressed to a very specific 80s horror film. Let's take a look. Every film so far for this Lovecraft month have all had a somewhat tongue-in-cheek goofiness to them. The Void immediately shuts that shit down. Firstly, we start with the image of a black triangle, something for later I feel, to a dilapidated house. Two men chase a man and woman outside. The man gets away, but the woman is gunned down and set alight while still alive. And as the two men drive off, we see they're being watched by a hooded figure with that same black triangle for a face, leading into the opening credits. They really make it clear that this film's not messing around. From the very beginning, they throw any kind of irony right out the window and really hammer home just what we're in for here. And it's clearly something brutal as hell. That's quite the opening. After the opening credits, we're introduced to our main character and police officer Daniel Carter, played by Aaron Poole, valiantly protecting and serving while unconscious in his squad car. The guy who had escaped earlier soon crosses his path. At first, Carter thinks he's just a drunk guy. However, when he sees he's severely injured, they're soon on their way to the nearest hospital. Carter is directed to a hospital he's somewhat reluctant to go to, but despite being understaffed, the nurses get the guy on a gurney with Carter's help, and it becomes clear that Carter and the nurse have history. We then meet our colourful cast of characters. First, a young pregnant girl, Maggie, and her grandfather. Pregnant girl in a Lovecraft-inspired film. Yeah, I'm sure she's gonna be just fine. There's also the trainee, Kim, and another patient. Carter gets chatting, looking quite uncomfortable being there. However, the guy he brought in is even more uncomfortable than him, as he's quickly sedated by Dr. Powell. Powell is played by Kenneth Walsh, who's a blast from the past for me, because he played good old Patrick O'Flynn in Survival of the Dead. And Kathleen Munro, who's also in The Void, played his daughter in Survival of the Dead. I don't know how the hell that happened. And if we're not careful, Dennis Hopper's gonna show up.
Wicked ass props to you, Mr. OG. And thanks for representing all the homeboys.
I love it when that happens. After the excitement, Carter and Allison are particularly careful with each other, and once Allison leaves, Powell enters to reveal more. Carter and Allison used to be together, but after they lost a child, the relationship stopped working. See? Told you pregnancies wouldn't go well in this film. I mean, that one had the good sense to bail before it even started. After that, it really doesn't take long for the shit to hit the fan, as Carter finds one of the nurses, with the other patient, giving him a bit of an impromptu eye surgery. The nurse has also carved the skin off her face, claiming that it isn't hers, but forces Carter to shoot her when she lunges with the scissors. Wow, yeah, it really didn't take long to go from zero to Lovecraft. And what's interesting about that is that at this moment, the incident is completely unexplained. It's just sudden insanity for no reason, which is pretty Lovecraftian. However, that randomness, might be an issue later. And of course, since this is the first thing to happen, we know things are going to get a hell of a lot worse before they get better. Kim and Allison quickly show up making what the fuck faces, and seriously, Kathleen Munro has a near constant, but still perfect, what the fuck face in this film. Back with Carter, he has a very real and human reaction to shooting someone in the face. Carter's clearly not doing so well because he soon faints, and while unconscious, he sees an ominous black landscape, intercut with something I can only describe as meaty, which finishes with an image of a giant black pyramid floating in the sky. Now, first, it's obvious the guys with the triangle faces have something to do with the black pyramid. However, it's not really a Lovecraft thing, so I'm not sure why it's here. There are a few references to pyramids, but nothing like this film. The best example I could find was a story called Imprisoned with the Pharaohs, also called Under the Pyramids, which was its draft title. But it's completely unrelated to this film. That story's got like Harry Houdini and a real living Sphinx creature, so much weirder than this film. Carter is woken up by Powell, ignoring the advice to take things easy as he speaks with a state trooper who's shown up. Carter explains the situation about the nurse, however, the trooper is more concerned with the guy he brought in as the house from the start was a complete bloodbath. The trooper is also a dick towards Carter, taking his gun and implying his father would be disappointed with how he handled the situation. Seems very odd for the trooper to bust Carter's balls like that when he really hasn't done anything wrong. Part of it could be an attempt to make Carter more of an underdog, who throughout the film will step up into a more heroic leader role, but we really haven't had enough time to know Carter, so we don't really know much about his character before they try and deconstruct it for us. Carter leaves the trooper to call the station, turning off a radio which is tuned to static, implying something is definitely going on now. But also I can't help thinking, Silent Hill reference? Possibly. And of course, Carter can't contact the station, resorting to using his car's radio instead. I think you can guess that one doesn't work either. So the hospital is getting cut off pretty damn quickly. And then Carter notices these same triangle-faced guys from before, who doesn't seem to be interested in just watching as he attacks Carter, stabbing him in the chest, before Carter escapes, revealing the place is quite significantly surrounded. People being possessed and killing each other in a location that's surrounded by crazies who are cutting it off. I guess my next question should be, where the hell's the giant vat of green devil juice? Yeah, there's no real way of getting around it. The Void has more than just a passing resemblance to Prince of Darkness, and the similarities will keep on coming. Carter gets inside, and it turns out the nurse he shot isn't dead. Again, no explanation of why there's tentacles growing out of her face now. Though the lack of explanation leaves it to the imagination, because any kind of reason given would more than likely end up seeming goofy. Oh right, I forgot about Carter bleeding to death. Allison and Powell work to stop the bleeding, but he does seem to be losing a hell of a lot of blood, resulting in Carter passing out once more, and this time he gets a more specific vision than before, as they will actually be the film's future events. There's no reason for him getting premonitions either, but for me at least, it feels like that whatever's happening is just spilling out all over the place, and it's affecting people in completely random and uncontrollable ways. Carter is pretty much fine, but if you ask me, he's a bit too fine. Because if you look at his wound and shirt, and then look at what happened before he passed out, where has all that blood gone? Since his shirt should be saturated with it. Now, two explanations spring to mind. One, it's just a glaring continuity error, which is very likely. Or, if you give the film the benefit of the doubt, it's possible that the ordeal was some sort of hallucination caused by the cultists, and the vision was a culmination of that. They then find the place is completely surrounded by said cultists who are waiting for something. The guy, Carter brought in, then wakes up quite violently, as the nurse from before has now mutated quite considerably into, I guess, a pile of goo and tentacles. I did find myself in my mind referring to that creature as a Shoggoth. I know it's not, since Shoggoths are much bigger and are just black blobs with eyes and tentacles, but I honestly couldn't help it. Maybe that's just me really wanting a proper adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. After a few gunshots do nothing, Carter breaks the guy free from the bed, and they decide to just leave the creature where it is and get the hell out of there, regardless of the army of cultists outside, as Carter takes a fire axe with him, determined to cut his way through, I guess. However, that's when gunshots are heard outside and the two guys from the start show up to hold everyone at gunpoint. And my usual naming convention is given a hand, because these two are just credited as the Father and the Son. The Holy Spirit will be around shortly. Communication isn't really high on everyone's priority, as the guy takes the pregnant girl hostage. Powell tries to get the guy to drop the knife, but considering what happened to the last person he was with, he's probably not that keen on cooperating, so naturally Powell is stabbed in the neck. And in the confusion, Maggie's grandfather manages to punch the guy out. Unfortunately, they really should have locked the door to the resident Shoggoth, as she's gotten out. It quickly grabs the trooper and drags him away. However, the limitations of the effects budget are pretty clear because it goes from being behind him and then suddenly dragging him away. It's likely that looked so chopped together because they couldn't afford to make it more visually impressive. And it's certainly not down to a lack of skill, because as we'll see, one of the directors and special effects artists, Stephen Kostansky, is a phenomenal artist. So I'm sure it's more down to a lack of funds than anything else. Carter, axe in hand, tries to save the trooper, but the Shoggoth seems to be making out with the guy, getting her tentacles right up in there. She's a love 'em and leave 'em kind of gal though, tossing the trooper aside, and wouldn't you know it, Carter is knocked out once again. While he takes a nap, the father and son take out the creature, killing it when it seems to grow something from its back and shooting that, and then hacking it to pieces, finishing it off. But it sure as hell doesn't go down easy. The father also decapitates the trooper, showing how this thing can spread. Back in the lobby, Dr. Powell is now dead, and Carter tries to get everyone safe, but the father is still determined to kill the guy from the start. When Carter wants answers about what's going on, he just gets smacked in the face. So we're once again at the classic horror movie dilemma of the people who actually know what's going on don't trust the main characters enough to actually reveal any information to them, which would solve a lot of problems. And another problem with that is that they've already seen the Shoggoth thing, so they don't have the excuse of, you wouldn't believe me if I told you. So it all seems slightly false to me. What does help, though? The son reveals that he received his injuries from the last people they trusted, which caused him to be mute, so that explains something at least. Also, that does show how these two have followed this infection around a while now, attacking it. Fortunately for Carter, the son stops the father from killing him, who is really a bit too kill-crazy. I get wanting to stop this infection, but he has no problem contemplating burning the hospital to the ground, when he doesn't even know if the infection is still a problem. They do wisely send the remnants of the creature outside, making sure to burn it though. And in one of the offices, while Allison tends to Maggie's pregnancy, the father has his little "you're all doomed" speech, Allison slapping him as he does. It won't be a surprise to any of you that the pregnancy is not going well, since Allison will need to get medical supplies. And there's actually quite a few nice pieces of character information here, all revolving around children too. First, the father drops a child's shoe, which he seems to have strong connections to, so it's reasonable to assume his current crusade was started with the child's death. Allison is also trying to convince Carter to let her go to the stores to get medicine. Carter accuses her of being too emotional over the baby due to the loss of their own child. She angrily has to explain how it's not about them. Which is a real look into these two characters and how they interact with each other. It's nicely written. Because there isn't that shared intimate moment where they're like, hey, remember why our marriage failed? Yeah, it's because of this, this, and this. No, instead, they keep it within the situation of the film, so the focus is there. So then we can see how he has a tendency to accuse her of being too emotional, and she accuses him of making it all about him. That's just my interpretation of what's happening here, but it seems pretty interesting and a realistic interaction to me. Allison convinces Carter to let her go, but not alone, so he tries to explain the situation to the father and son, saying that he needs to get his shotgun from the car. They reluctantly agree to help him get it. However, when they're outside, for some unknown reason, the car is now a lot further away from the hospital than it was before. It's possible the cultists just moved his car to be dicks. But my preferred explanation is that whatever's happening in the hospital is causing reality around the building to warp and distort. Carter gives the keys to the trunk, hands shaking, clearly showing the night's events taking its toll. They get to the car and remove anything they can carry. The shotgun is locked, which Carter has to fumble with. At the same time, Allison didn't bother to wait for Carter to return and gets the medicine herself. And rather surprisingly, none other than Dr. Powell appears behind her, with an orchestra sting to really get the point across that he's not Lazarus. Back outside, they've kind of run out of time as the cultists are beginning to converge, and I guess Carter thought some mood lighting would be appropriate, turning on the red and blues, just as the cultists attack, slashing at the sun. Fortunately, these guys aren't as hardy as the Shoggoth creature, so a shotgun blast is enough to take them down. The group get back inside, Carter pissed off that Allison has now disappeared, and he goes off with the father to find her. After a brief altercation where Carter tells the father,
Shut the fuck up!
They now notice that Powell's body has disappeared as well. We're kind of at the midway point now, and I'm still trying to figure out whether I like this film's style of slow burn, because it's very light on revealing what's happening. And I suspect that's because when it comes to the amount of plot it has, it's rather lacking in the lore. Don't get me wrong, the Shoggoth thing, cultists, Powell back to life, all good things to move the story forward. It just, like I mentioned earlier, it feels lacking in the reason. Like, compare this film to Oculus. There, the reason given is, Evil Mirror did it. And then the film's events revolve around that. But here, randomness is happening for random's sake. I'm all for being cryptic. I would just like something to link it all together. Because right now, we got nothing. Anyway, Carter and the father find where Allison was with just the bag of medicine left in her place. On the way, Carter hears a phone ringing, seeing that the call is coming from the morgue. And what do you know? It's Dr. Powell, finally revealed to be the bad guy. I guess I was a bit quick there in saying the film wasn't forthcoming with its answers. Or maybe the film heard me and is answering me. Oh, spooky. The father finds quite the explicit collection of photographs that Powell owns, as well as some kind of spell book. And on the phone, Powell claims he's going to help everyone before hanging up. Also, the photos are not just Powell's porn collection, they're linked to the Triangle cultists. So now Carter's got his game face on, with Kim freaking out at being left alone. Fortunately, the grandfather is given a gun and the fire axe. But instead of blindly wandering the hospital in search of a dead guy, the father has a better idea, as he sees one of Powell's photographs contains the guy who seemingly started this whole thing in the first place. Torture ensues, with the guy not being particularly forthcoming with information.
Oh, no.
Now, they don't resort to full-on torture as you just saw, and I do take issue with that. Because at the start of the film, these two had no problem gunning down and then burning alive someone who was in the exact same position as this guy. So, why change now? These two don't really seem like the kind of people to fuck around when they need information. At least they didn't at the start of the film. But I guess, now that they're more main characters, the film's giving us more of a reason to empathise with them. Carter decides to take the guy with him, which he's not particularly happy about. And in the lowest part of the hospital, it looks as if it was just a matter of time for horror shit to happen, considering just how dilapidated the place is. Though Kim is giving them directions, however, the door to the morgue is not where it should be, as the basement is nothing but endless corridors. Eventually, they lose contact with Kim altogether. They eventually find another set of stairs going down, which shouldn't exist, sending their captive first. This reality-bending stuff, like with the car and the hospital being bigger and deeper than it should be, is good stuff that sells the idea that something huge and epic and powerful is going on, enough to bend reality. However, apart from a bit of an obstacle and one piece of character development for the father later on, it doesn't really do much more than that. It's just more of this randomness that just happens and is then moved on from. I just wish it was a lot more substantial, because it's a bit of a missed opportunity at this point. While Carter and crew fumble in the darkness, we finally see what's happened to Allison, as she wakes up in the morgue, not looking particularly well. Powell is there, doing something with bloody tools, revealing that he's currently in the process of removing his own skin. Why is that the go-to for cosmic horrific beings? What do they have against human skin? Bound to give a guy a complex or something. Carter and crew find a room with a triangle etched on the floor in some kind of summoning circle. The father and son both recognize it as identical to the place from the start. But for some reason, it's not the huge ominous symbol on the ground that gives Carter his vision. It's the crudely painted triangle on the door that causes him to remember Allison's pregnancy and then the huge pyramid in the sky. Powell continues explaining his philosophies. However, when he mentions that he's been experimenting and his mistakes are still around, you can tell that's not a good thing for Carter and the others. The film seems to enjoy all these kinds of horror movie cliches, but honestly, I have to ask, why do people who make horrific monstrosities keep on insisting on keeping them all around and not getting rid of them? We've seen it 3 times now, whether it be Powell or Kerwin or good old Herbert West. Powell claims he's trying to stop death, which I've also noticed is never meant in a fun, happy way, but always in the blood and viscera method of fighting death, proving my point when Powell reveals he's now removed his face, and also shows that Allison now has something growing inside her. Wow, we almost forgot the Prince of Darkness similarities there for a second. Fortunately, this specific one is pretty superficial, and nowhere near the most egregious one we'll be getting into soon. Well, with Allison's new pregnancy progressing, the current one upstairs is not going well at all. And with a freaking out Kim there, contemplating performing a C-section, it's not looking good. Carter and crew have found the room where they keep the dead bodies. Well, they look dead, but the father suddenly gets some kind of psychic attack, and then the impact of Powell's comment about him not letting the dead actually die is seen. As the other patients attack. These creatures really do show off the skills of the special effects artist, Steven Kostanski. Also, these creatures were part of the Indiegogo campaign. For the 2000 reward, you could be in the film as one of these so-called patients, keeping the mask worn. They had a similar award to play one of the cultists too. And about that Indiegogo campaign, it said this film was made through crowdfunding. But that's not strictly speaking true. It was just for the effects budget, which, as I've mentioned, is quite lacking in some places. No one took them up on those specific offers to be in the film, by the way. Upstairs, the cultists finally break in, and in the basement, fighting ensues with the patients gunned down. And then the father sees his wife and child, at least I assume that's who they are, wandering off, before their hostage then attacks Carter, because that's going to help the situation, especially as more creatures converge on them, so the inevitable happens as the guy is dragged away and killed pretty quickly. You can tell things are quickly coming to a head here, and although I've not found the film slow at all, I do think that the last hour of the film could have been changed around a bit so they interspersed some of the more crazy things happening now. So then, it's not just one big explosion right at the end of the film, and it's more a big gathering storm throughout. But maybe the explosive nature of it is the point. I'm just not really a fan of the film waiting most of its runtime to just blow its load all at once. And to keep the ball rolling on this craziness, Kim freaks out about having to do a C-section while under siege. Gramps tries to calm her down, even cowboying up. However, that's when his granddaughter is revealed to be evil and slits his throat. Well, I say she's evil, but it's not really made clear. She does say how lucky she is to have Powell's baby, but that doesn't really prove anything. She just could be severely brainwashed. But I guess I'm just disappointed, because it would have been a much better twist if she was the actual leader and Powell was subservient to her. The film already has this strange veneration for pregnancy and babies, so it would make sense that the mother is the big bad here. Sadly, that's not really the case. After Maggie's heel turn, the power goes out and the cultists appear to take her to the basement. I guess she's got over her earlier problem. The place is still surrounded, though. That's arguably the most useless use of a fire axe in history, considering those cultists aren't trying to get in, and they're already in behind her. And the axe would have been far more useful as a weapon. But I'm sure Kim isn't thinking straight. She at least locks herself in a closet. In the basement, the son is running around after the father, and this is where that reality-bending thing comes up again, as the hospital changes into their home. The son finds his father gibbering to himself, but then he attacks his son, shouting that he should have protected them. I assume he means his wife and child. The son manages to burn him with a flare to snap him out of it, holding him at gunpoint. Which nicely shows why he was so weary of trusting people now, seeing as how they can be so easily manipulated by these forces. I just think it would have been helpful for him to tell someone that from the start. Back with Carter, he's finally found his way to the morgue and to Allison, who at first seems relatively fine, but then she just turns into a giant mass of tentacles and goo. So Carter makes the decision to put an end to it, hacking it to pieces. A glossy triangle appears on the wall after that, along with Powell asking Carter what he sees, but I really don't think he's in the mood to chat. Powell seems pretty confident that he's cheated death, and his quest to bring his daughter back to life is nearly complete. That's one thing that confuses me about Powell's motivation to do this crap, because he says it's to bring his daughter back to life. But it's very clear that it's not his daughter at all and just some kind of cosmic monstrosity, so is Powell just a naive moron who doesn't realise what he's doing is bad? Or is he just as brainwashed as everyone else? And that's not a good position for your main villain to be in because it means he has zero agency. I would have much preferred it if his attitude was something like, I did this to bring my daughter back, but now I see wider possibilities. That would give him so much more authority, but right now, he's just another lackey. Speaking of lackeys, the cultists with Maggie show up, and she casually stabs Carter in the back, literally and figuratively. But really, Carter recovered nicely from the last stabbing he took, so he should be fine. Powell, who's now gone full Frank... I keep finding reasons to reference Hellraiser in these videos, don't I? Anyway, Powell performs some kind of ritual in front of the glowing triangle, opening up a portal. And then it's back to what I said about not being sure if Maggie is complicit in all this, because she seems to want what Powell offers, but then doesn't really look so keen when it starts to happen, so who knows really. But regardless, Powell's daughter is given birth to, kind of in the xenomorph method, and despite it being a screaming viscera-covered quadruped, Powell seems pretty happy with the results. Again, idiot or lackey, I just want to know. Also, I usually enjoy Lovecraftian films that don't explain themselves too much, so even I think it's weird that I keep coming back to this. But I think it's because The Void doesn't just keep its plot to itself, it genuinely feels like it's making it up as it goes along. Because, as I mentioned earlier, there doesn't seem to be anything holding it together. Anyway, the father and son show up to save the day, shooting the daughter creature, which just seems to piss it off. Also, I can't decide if the creature dragging around Maggie's half her body is supposed to be horrifying or trying to be really darkly comical. The father and son lure the creature into another room as they fight. Eventually, he grabs and draws the father in to presumably eat him, but good luck trying to identify a mouth. In a surprising piece of circular storytelling, the father then decides to take the creature out with him as he sets himself on fire, with the help of the son, who manages to get the hell out of there. Powell is still enjoying his portal, but fortunately a fire axe to the shoulder stops him for a second. But only for a second, as he grabs Carter, giving him the usual speech of bringing Allison back for him and all that. Carter's not really interested, though. And that would have to be the biggest suggestion that this film and Prince of Darkness have similarities, because it's basically the same ending. And I would go so far as to say that this is essentially the Lovecraftian Prince of Darkness. Now, is it better than Prince of Darkness? Well, I'll save that for my conclusion. Once the portal closes, the building begins to shake and crumble as the newly formed parts of the hospital start to close. The creature was obviously not dead and gives chase to the son. Fortunately for him, he makes it out in time as everything is reverted to normal. He even meets up with Kim, who I would have put money on as being part of the dead. And the film ends as we see the other world beyond the portal. Carter and Allison have found each other as they hold hands while the black pyramid looms above. So that was The Void, and I have to be honest here, it's nowhere near as good as people led me to believe. The Void is a good film, yes. However, I remember when this had just been released and it was touted as the second coming of Cthulhu, like it was some kind of return to form for the genre, but it's really not. I don't think I need to say how derivative it is. It's basically Prince of Darkness, for God's sake, so it's hardly innovative. But the actual Lovecraft influence is bare bones. Without all the Black Pyramid stuff, it's just another monster movie. Which of course is not a bad thing, and what it does very well. But in terms of adding something new to this cinematic mythos, it's definitely the least good film I've reviewed. So yeah, it's alright, good even in places, just nothing special for me. Oh, and I've also seen people criticising this film for the acting ability on display. That's something I would disagree with. I don't have any problems with the actors in this film. Except the whole survival of the dead coincidence, which always freaks me out when that happens. So finally, H.P. Lovecraft month, the longest month in the history of months ever recorded, is finally over. and it'll be back to the more usual kind of films next time. I do apologise for the sporadic upload schedule. One of these days I'll get it right. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Wouldn't mind dying. I got to go by myself. Wouldn't mind dying. I got to go by myself. Wouldn't mind dying. I got to go by myself.